Welcome to Kalamazoo's podcast. We're talking Kalamazoo people, places, events, and history. There are still plenty of stories out there waiting to be told, and that's why we're here. Your host is a former busboy at High Wheeler, fry cook at Long John Silver's, real cook at Ponderosa, and one-time weekend lackey at the Kalamazoo Gazette. He's spent over 30 years talking into the business end of a microphone, and he's recording Kalamazoo history, one project at a time. Scotty Bud Melvin.
Hello, and thank you for checking out Kalamazoo's podcast. We explore Kalamazoo history, events, people, and places. And make sure you check out some of our other podcasts as well. And you'll also be able to find me everywhere on social media and at scottybud.com. We are looking into the stories of Kalamazoo. There are plenty to be told, and that's why we're here preserving Kalamazoo history one click at a time. And today we're delving into one of my favorite things, one of my favorite subjects, of course, radio, and hopefully our guest's favorite subject as well. He is a radio legend for sure, over 50 years in the biz, and you will remember him and his voice from his days at AM 1360 WKMI in Kalamazoo in the 70s and 80s. KMI was king back then for sure, but he is still on the air, and we'll get to that as well today. He is Jim Higgs. Hi, Jim.
Scott, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for the time.
My pleasure.
Right.
Legend, I'm not sure about.
Sure.
But,
Come on, we throw it around. It's fine. So today I want to do a couple things. I want to make sure this is conversational. I don't want it to sound like an interview. You and I have done too many interviews over the years.
Indeed.
We always know the answers to the questions. I have a lot of things I want to talk about with you, as we discussed before, mostly WKMI radio in the 70s, which is when I was growing up. And as I decided that I wanted to be in the radio business, one of the people I heard during that time was you. So I thank you for that. You were one of those people.
You're still thanking me for getting you into radio?
For this terrible...
Seriously?
Yeah. Thank you for helping me get into a career where I make no money and have no idea if I'll be back tomorrow.
You know, you probably didn't have the same high school counselor that I did. I'm sure you didn't. But my high school counselor, when I walked into his office the first time and said, I'd like to go into radio. And he had, a file with all of these occupations, which showed the pluses and minuses and everything you'd have to worry about. And he said, I think you should change your mind. He says, it's low pay, right. You got to travel all the time, and the job security stinks. So, and I respected this guy a lot, too, but I totally ignored what he told me. And decided to go into radio anyway.
You. And you obviously, I'm thinking, knew that you wanted to be in radio before high school, I'm guessing.
Well, during high school.
Okay.
During high school.
Yeah. Because, a lot of people don't know. I had this discussion with my daughter a few years ago. They expect you to know what you're doing the rest of your life when you're 17 years old. It's not always how it works. It worked for us, you and I, but not for everybody, these poor kids.
No. Well, you see, my dad had been a radio repairman during World War II. He was in the Signal Corps. And so I grew up, he had, resistors and capacitors and tubes and everything all over the workbench in the basement. So he tried his best to lead me toward a technical career in radio, but the magic was too great.
Yeah, well,
You know, those distant voices.
Exactly. Coming out of the little box somehow.
Yeah.
I know.
You're listening to Cleveland, and you're listening, of course, to Chicago and all of these faraway places, and it just creates a fascination.
Yeah. And I did the same thing, obviously, listening to the radio under my pillow at night when I should have been sleeping.
Yep.
And I can imagine, even for you, years before I did it, even more magical.
Well, right up here,
there it is.
Above me, you can see a Hallicrafter's S38E communications receiver. That was the beast.
Wow.
And I had headphones to plug into it,
sure.
And I used to get yelled at frequently by my mother, who said, "Turn that thing off and go to sleep."
I love that you still have that. That's great.
Yeah.
Good for you. So before we get to the main thing I wanted to talk to you about, of course, WKMI.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to KMI? A couple of stops before WKMI,
couple of
right?
stops before. Well, I started in the summer of 1962, 2 months out of high school, at the station I now own.
Right. Yeah.
AM 980, which at that time was WDMC, which stood for Dwight M. Cheever, who was the former probate judge for Allegan County, who put the station on the air in 1962.
Okay. Wow.
And I had tried to get into college and failed.
Yeah.
I think they had a lot different standards then than they do now.
Sure.
And so I was working for my parents. They owned an engraving shop in downtown Plainwell, and I was working there in the office when a friend of mine came in and said, I just heard they have an opening for announcer in Otsego, at the station in Otsego. Mm-hmm. So I immediately scooted over there, and they put me in a studio and gave me some AP copy and said, read this, and I did, and they hired me just like that.
Well, that's easy.
Yeah.
What kind of station was it? What?
Well, it was a full-service station at the time. The music was what we would call middle of the road.
Sure.
We had an hour of country music with Sally Massey in the afternoon, and you got a chance to do most everything.
Oh yeah.
At a small station like that. Well, I lasted there from August of '62 until May of '63, when they laid me off because the $3,000 a month they were billing wasn't enough to keep paying me and keep the station on the air.
Wow. So you get laid off. You're not even there a year.
Right. But I did make a tape before I left.
Oh, sure, of course.
So I hiked that thing around to all kinds of stations, including WKMI. Mm. And a friend of my father's knew Howard Steer, who was the owner and general manager.
Right.
And for whatever reason, he decided to give me an interview. And so I met with him in his office, my little 7-inch reel of tape, and gave that to him and gave him my best speech. And he handed the reel to Vince Ford, who was the program director at KMI in 1963. And he disappeared for a while, and I continued to talk to Howard, and Vince came back and handed the tape back to Howard. And I didn't see the communication between them, but I assume that Vince shook his head no.
Ah.
So Howard told me, you need a little more experience before you come here.
Okay.
And but he did send me to a station in Charlotte, who was owned by a friend of his.
Wow. And
put in a word for me. I didn't get that job either. But then eventually I ended up at WHTC in Holland.
Ah, which is still there, I believe.
Which is still there.
Same call letters.
The Talk of the Town show, which is on mornings there, is still on.
Oh.
I only did that show once for a week. Mm-hmm. And probably screwed up everybody's recipes. But I spent almost 4 years there and eventually made my way into KMI, which was my eventual goal. That's where I wanted to be. I grew up listening to it.
Right. So you're from Plainwell originally.
Yes. This house.
Literally in the same house.
Yeah.
Which is where we're recording.
This was my grandparents' house. My mother was living here when I was born. My dad was overseas.
Holy cow. And so now, same house, the radio station you own
with the studio below us.
Right. And where was the studio before when you first started?
When I started, it was out on the riverbank where the transmitter is.
Right.
In a 12 by 60 foot house trailer.
Yeah.
The office and studio was in the trailer.
Right next to the transmitter, or adjacent to it, or probably.
Well, actually, at that time, the transmitter was in the trailer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
They built the transmitter building later.
And so that antenna and transmitter is still there.
Yep.
It is now yours.
Yep.
It is on the river.
That's right.
It is just past where you go over the river, going whatever that is, west, north on M89.
Yep.
So if the river's on the left, you can see the antenna if you're driving that way.
Yep.
And they are fixing the river. I don't know what they're fixing. They actually moved the river.
Yeah,
right?
they've
tweaked
they've
it.
done a little rerouting,
Yeah.
but it's
It's a major thing.
it's a federal Superfund site, and they're
Yeah.
removing PCBs.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's a
they've been using our property as a staging area.
yeah. Okay, but it hasn't affected your.
Hasn't affected us in any way.
You didn't get a phone call. Whoops, we accidentally backed the backhoe. And
Actually, we've gotten to know the manager of the project fairly well.
Good.
And he's a good guy, and they've treated our property with respect. So.
Super. So you go. You're in Holland 4 years. In that time, you have honed your skills.
Mm-hmm.
Were you asked to leave?
No. That time it was voluntary.
Really?
I've been in this business for 55 years. I've been fired 3 times.
3 times. Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
And one of them was terribly cordial when I was asked to leave WNWN.
Oh, okay.
When they found out that I was part of the group buying the station in Otsego.
Gotcha.
And Gary Maloney, who is still a good friend of mine, came in on New Year's Eve and said, I think it's time you left now because I don't want you taking a lot of my audience with you.
Wow. All right. Well, let's get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about you leave. So you left on your own.
I left on my own.
Wanted to go to KMI. I'm guessing you're shopping your tape around and finally said, listen, I'm ready to go here.
Yeah. My good friend Tom Summers, who now does afternoons on WAKV, AM 980, he had worked at KMI and Holland and Otsego.
Oh, boy.
He kind of followed me around, except that he got into KMI a year before I did.
Okay.
But I had applied at WKMI and eventually got a phone call from Bob King of Holiday and King,
right?
Bob Salmon, who was the program director, and we met, and I got hired as an FM tech and part-time newsman.
FM.
At the time, there was WSEO FM.
In the building?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I'm unaware of.
Yeah.
So this is late 60s.
1967,
Okay.
April of 67.
And there's 2 stations in
The AM and the FM,
Got it.
which began as WKMI FM,
Okay.
later became WSEO, and then was sold to Fairfield as WQLR,
There
which
you
is now WV something.
Right. Yep. Got it. 106.5, I think. Is
Yes.
And they were beautiful music at some point back
Yes.
in the 60s and
Yep.
70s.
Steve Trivers and Bill Wirtz bought it from Steer Broadcasting.
Right. All right. So you're in KMI now.
Yep.
You're doing what?
FM tech, which meant I got to change the reels on the automation.
Okay. Automation in 1967
Was we thought it was pretty sophisticated
Sure.
at the time, but compared to today,
Right.
completely different. But yeah, it was automated, and I forget how. I think there were 4 reel-to-reel machines, and
That's pretty good.
a few cartridge machines, and some kind of a little brain that ran it all.
Right.
So I was an FM tech. I was a part-time news guy,
Okay.
and I jocked on the weekends. And I went in. It was kind of funny. I just spent 4 years in Holland. I'm an Englishman
Okay.
with some Scottish roots as
Got
well, and I just spent 4 years in Holland.
Right.
And I walked in for my first weekend air shift, and the announcer schedule was posted on the bulletin board, and they had me down as Jim Van Dyke.
Oh, boy.
And
Nobody told you.
nobody asked, nobody told me. So I immediately went to Bob King, and I said, I can't do that. I said, I'm a Plainwell guy. You cover Plainwell. You really want me to use my own name? And he relented.
Wow. I'm shocked, actually.
So I've been fortunate enough to use my own name throughout my radio
That's
career.
good for you. You don't always get to do that. So you're the new guy
Yep.
Eventually, you ended up, I'm guessing, first real full-time thing, music director, maybe, news director.
I went into the news department first
Yeah.
as a full-time news guy. I became news director in '68, I think,
Okay.
when Bob Barr left. That's a name that, some of your older listeners will remember.
Okay.
Robert Cooper Barr III. And he left and went to, I think, someplace in Ohio. And they named me news director. So I spent a certain amount of time there as news director. Tom Summers had become the program director.
Okay.
And Tom had to go on his 6-month Army Reserve duty.
6 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was gone for a while, and in that time, I got named program director.
Sure. This was Vietnam, maybe.
Yeah.
So 6 months, yeah.
Yeah, but his was all in the States.
Here, okay.
He didn't go overseas.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay, so you had to take over, basically.
Yeah.
All right. And so I'm guessing at KMI, how many years were you there total?
13.
13 years. You probably did all the jobs, I'm guessing. On the air, PD, music director, news director.
Yeah.
Just
Morning guy.
somebody leaves, you take over. Yeah,
Yeah.
morning guy. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
You were the morning guy.
I did mornings, middays, and afternoons at various times, but mostly in the morning.
Yeah. So, morning show on KMI in the 70s as a young man, myself, teenager. When I realized I wanted to get into this business, your radio station was the reason. And I would listen to that station in the morning. So that was you. And I would listen to it when I got home from school at night.
Which was Michael J. Steele early.
Sure.
And then Dave Thompson.
Then Dave, who was my guy.
Yep.
And then I would listen at night, which was, I don't even remember, a couple of different people, I'm sure.
Several people.
Yeah.
When I started at night, when I started in '67 at night, was Johnny Collins. And after him was Dave Connors, who was a Kalamazoo boy, actually, named Marty Lambros.
Oh, okay.
And he ended up in Atlanta.
Wow.
Big-time jock in Atlanta, and is still living there.
Shoot. Wow, that's a nice move.
Yep.
That's an upward move if I've ever heard one.
Yeah.
For sure.
For a while, he stopped off for a while in Charleston, West Virginia, after we bought the station in Charleston. He was there for a while.
And how long was that Steer owned that station?
Yes. He sold WSEO
Right.
to Trivers and Wirtz and used the proceeds to buy the smallest AM station in Charleston, West Virginia. This was not exactly the best business move.
Small.
It was on 14-something, 1,000-watt daytime. And he sent Tom Summers down there to be the program director. Poor Tom. Oh, I felt so. He offered it to me.
Oh, really?
And I said, no, I'm in Plainwell.
Yeah,
I
you didn't want to
like
move.
being in Plainwell.
Sure.
I don't remember. I think I was on the city council by that time. And I didn't want to go to Charleston, West Virginia. And so he kind of, I think, pressured Tom to.
And that didn't last long, huh?
Well, Tom didn't stay too long because of some shenanigans at the station. And so he bailed and came back and started driving a beer truck.
Really? Here?
Yeah.
Oh.
Before he bought his bar in downtown Plainwell, Summers Place, which
Yeah.
gained a certain amount of notoriety.
Wow.
And that was before he became a flight attendant for Southwest Airlines.
He's been all over the place.
He's been all over the place.
And he's here now, though.
He lives here
Yeah.
in Allegan County. He's a great guy. He and I have known each other since we were 3 years old.
Really? Wow.
Went to school together. Our families vacationed together.
Oh, okay.
We're pretty close.
That's awesome. Wow. Good for you. All
Great
right.
guy. He's a highly talented guy. He could have probably gone anywhere on the radio if
Really?
he had decided to pursue it.
One of those guys.
Just very, very funny.
Let's talk about some of the other people
Okay.
that I'm going to remember. And 60s was a little early for me. I was born in 63, so I hadn't quite jumped on until the early 70s. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the people, if you can remember some of them. Bill Anthony, obviously, we both know.
Bill Anthony,
both knew
Dexter
Bill.
Andrews, one of the best guys I ever worked with in
Yep.
this business, and who left us sadly way too soon.
Yep.
Just a really great guy.
I got to work with him a couple of years, 03, 04, 05, I believe, or 04, 05, something like that, at Jennings Drive there, before I got the boot in 2005. And when I got the boot in 05, Bill was running KMI, as it was,
Yeah.
mostly automated,
Right.
obviously. But they still needed somebody to do the work. He was more shook up about me getting let go than I was.
I can understand that. I believe that.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was touching to me.
Yeah,
That's the kind of guy he was.
he was.
And one of a kind for sure. And I always wished I had his pipes.
No kidding.
Let's see. Gary Outlaw
Gary Outlaw
was a nighttime 70s guy.
overnight.
Overnight.
Jock.
Yep.
Started overnight. I don't remember if we moved him into evenings.
Maybe not.
I don't recall.
Yeah, but I would
And
catch him once in a
recall-
while.
I don't recall the circumstances of his leaving, but I do know that he had great success afterwards as a jock on Jones Network's Oldies Network.
Right. I've heard of it.
He's living now, I think, in Denver. Whether he's still on the air, I don't know.
Yeah. Always liked him.
Very nice guy.
Another friend of ours who we both knew, Bill Martin,
Bill Martin,
also gone too soon.
I think a native of Three Rivers,
Correct.
if I remember correctly, was my night guy. I think he moved into afternoons at one point.
Could
I
be.
don't remember for sure.
Might he have taken over when Dave Thompson left?
No, Jeff Mark.
Mark took. Okay.
Jeff Mark moved into that. We made quite a big deal about it.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's a story
I
in
remember
and of
that.
itself.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that too.
But Bill Martin, after he left KMI, found great success as a programmer
Right.
in Lansing, I believe, and in North Carolina.
Yes.
if I recall correctly.
And I think his big claim to fame down there was he hired John Boy and Billy on for his morning show, and they became syndicated, very popular down south.
And then he came back.
Came back, hired me at 107
Okay.
in 1988. So that was my in over there, and ended up staying 17 years there.
And then he came up to Otsego.
And then, that's where he last worked, which was
Yeah.
mornings in the 2010, 11,
somewhere
12,
around
right
there.
in there.
Yeah.
And then he left, did a couple of other things.
And then he passed.
And he passed a couple of years ago, unfortunately.
I got to thinking about that, how many of the people I worked with at KMI who are gone. Are gone.
I know.
It really kind of shakes me when I start listing all the names.
Right. And that's one of the things I think about. Same here, because I knew Bill Anthony. I worked with him, knew Bill Martin very well.
Mm-hmm.
Bill and I did a lot of stuff together. And I start seeing these people who I know pass away, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is horrible. And no offense to you. I shouldn't say no offense, but no disrespect meant. But I'm trying to talk with people who were in this business and get their stories.
Before we disappear.
I don't mean to say that out loud. I'm glad you said it. But you know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just turned 73.
Okay.
And I fully recognize that, I'm not going to be around forever.
Sure.
But I'd like to stick around for a couple more years. So
Why
let's
not?
not rush it, okay?
Let's not rush it. Let's not do that. And you still run your own radio station, so you've got things to do.
That's true.
Who else did I want to get to on KMI in the mid-'70s? Other than I want to get to my favorite guy here in a minute. I'm trying to remember. Late '70s, maybe the Beeve.
The Beeve.
Kelly.
Yep.
Was one of my favorites. He was wacky. He was the wacky, maybe evening guy.
Yeah,
I think
we hired him to be wacky.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it worked.
And I don't remember which one of us came up with the name Beaver Weaver. I think it was me that thought of giving away shot glasses called the Beaver Shot.
Nice.
I don't remember. I've got one downstairs yet, but he was pretty good jock.
Hell yeah,
he was a very good jock.
I'll tell you what. Listening to his show, like I did as a teenager, that guy, whatever he did, 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever it was, he must have been spent at the end of his show.
Yeah.
With the reels and the tapes and the splicing and the on the phone and changing records and grabbing records. People don't realize back then it wasn't just pushing buttons. There were no buttons at all.
No. And most records at the most were 3.5 minutes back then.
And you had to grab them and cue them.
Unless you could, unless you could play Lion Eyes 3 times a night.
Yeah. Or Hotel California.
Yeah. I mean, there were those songs. Fortunately, the bathroom at KMI was only about 30 feet away from the studio.
Yeah, true. And, a bad dash.
But you had to have those long records for...
I'm hopefully going to hunt him down at some point. I know he's... I've chit-chatted with him a couple of times.
He's in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to get his story at some point because he was a crazy jock and I loved him.
I love it because he still calls me boss.
Good.
Every time we have an exchange on Facebook, he says, "Hey, boss."
Yeah, that's good. I like that. All right, let's talk about my favorite guy.
I know who that is.
Who was the main reason I first had the light bulb go off over my head to get into this radio business.
The bad boy of Kalamazoo
He was
radio.
the bad boy, and if you didn't like him, he didn't like you.
That's right.
That was his saying. I don't know if that's what hooked me or just his wackiness in general, that he loved to say crazy things on the radio and seemingly get away with it.
David Elwood Thompson.
Yes. For me, that's what hooked it for me. And I've kind of had my radio career go that way. I've been that guy. I'm known for ranting and, not always exactly the same guy on the air as I am off. But when he did that shtick on the air, I said, that is the deal right there. That is who I have to model myself after. And it was Dave Thompson on KMI. And he was insane. And he's from Otsego.
He is from Otsego.
How about that?
And he started
over
at
here.
AM 980.
Yeah, which is down the street a little bit. So how did he come to KMI? Did you find him or did he come to you?
No, we found him.
Okay.
And it's really kind of funny because I don't remember whether it was Dave Steer or Bob Salmon that came into my office one day and said, "I just heard this guy on WTPS or BUK. I forget which it was at the time. I think it was still TPS.
Portage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same state. BUK and TPS
were
the same station.
Yeah.
And they came in and said, "I just heard this guy, and I think you should interview him for a job."
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so I listened first, and I'm thinking, what on earth did they hear in this kid?
What was he doing? Was he just normal?
No.
Oh, he was wacky there?
He was a little crazy, but not nearly as crazy as he became. Mm-hmm. But I called him, and we got together, and I hired him to do afternoons.
Right.
And I don't know what possessed me to do that. And the thing with David was that he had no hang-ups of any kind about saying things on the air.
Sure. No filter.
His first day on the air, he called the station 4 giant toothpicks in the sky in a padded cell.
Nice.
And shortly after that, because he hadn't really learned the board and the control room all that well, it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which button makes the cartridge go? Now, your non-radio listeners are not going to understand all of that, and his non-radio listeners didn't understand, but it had the rest of us just kind of rolling in the aisles.
Oh, my God. So how long was he there?
Well,
5 years?
No, I think it was more like 4.
Okay.
I'm thinking maybe late 72 or early 73 until sometime in early 77 or late 76.
Okay.
I don't remember.
It just seems like it was longer to me. But,
it does seem like that.
A big body of work.
But there's a lot of misunderstanding about how he left.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the fact is that I used to have David in my office about 3 times a week to talk to him about things he had said or done.
Someone probably called and complained every day, I'm guessing.
Well,
close enough.
We got a lot of those. We got a few death threats. There were times when he had to have a sheriff's deputy escort him out of the building in the evening. But on this particular occasion, you remember, I'm sure, Terry Ficcarelli.
Yep.
We all remember Terry fondly.
Sure.
Except that he was one of the wordiest people I've ever known in my life.
Indeed.
Well, Thompson made a point of making fun of Terry Ficcarelli.
Uh-oh. Who would come on, by the way, the voice of the Kalamazoo Wings hockey team, would come on and do updates in the building.
Yes.
Correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we all knew him
Yep.
well.
He'd drive down, do an update in the afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
And tell you what was going on with the hockey team.
But David decided he was going to do some kind of a recorded bit about Ferry Ticcarelli or something of that nature.
That sounds about right.
And I called him in. And by this time, I don't know if he would admit it, but by this time, David had gotten just a little bit big for his britches.
Sure. Very popular.
He had a lot of fame.
Yep.
He was a big deal.
That's right.
In Kalamazoo.
Mm-hmm.
But he had done something about Terry that was not at all funny.
Ooh.
It was meant to be funny, but it wasn't funny. And I brought him in when he came in the next day. He usually came in about 12:30 to start his 3 to 7 show.
Yeah.
So I brought him into my office, and I said, David, that thing you did yesterday about Terry, it wasn't funny.
Yeah.
And he was crushed.
Oh, man.
I mean, he was just, what do you mean it's not funny? It was funny. He says, I wrote it. I did it myself. I said, it wasn't funny.
Oh, boy. A chink in the armor.
I said, you need to not take that any further. Well, he left my office, and a short time later, I found him sitting against the wall in the back hallway, just kind of shaking his head. And about 2:30, half hour before his show, he came into my office and he said, that's it, I quit.
Whoa. Wow.
I said, what do you mean you quit? You're starting in a half hour. Nope, he says, I can't do it. I'm done.
Wow.
That was a funny bit, he said. I'm out of here. And he left.
That was it.
Yeah, 25 minutes to air.
Oh, yeah, of course. Wow.
So I ended up doing his show that day. And that's when we brought Jeff Mark in, who had been a part-timer.
Mm-hmm.
And we staged a kidnapping of Jeff Mark.
Right.
We wanted to overshadow whatever it was David was going to do. Turns out he went over to WYYY,
Yep.
called a news conference to announce that he was going there. Nobody came to the news conference.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And
ouch.
yeah. So we had a big build-up for Find Jeff Mark.
Yeah.
And I drove him to his parents' house in South Haven, where he stayed for a couple of days, and we began to give clues on the air. We staged a celery walkout.
Ah.
It was really goofy.
Sure.
But it worked, and so all of a sudden we've got somebody filling in for Jeff Mark, who has walked out and disappeared. And then we finally brought him back and put him in somebody's home, and we gave clues to where he was. And sooner or later, somebody knocked on the door and found him, and they won a big prize.
Sure. And that's a good one, man. Even the goofy ones are.
Oh, yeah.
People dig, even if you think they're goofy.
That's right.
I've learned that.
As long as you can keep people talking about you.
Sure.
That's the big thing.
Now, see, I had always heard, and I had hoped to ask Dave at some point about this, but I had always heard it was a salary issue.
No.
Where he had gone and asked for more money, and KMI said no.
No.
Dang it.
No, and I did not fire him.
Okay, he was just done.
There were rumors that he had been fired. He was not fired. He quit.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, I have asked, just on the record, I have asked Dave Thompson to do my podcast, and this was last year.
Well, folks should know. Folks should know that David is not the wild and crazy guy he was back then.
Yeah.
He is now a pastor at Texas Corners Bible Church. He's a well-respected pastor.
Sure.
He does some radio broadcasts on behalf of his church.
Ironically, on KMI.
On KMI and other stations as well.
Sure.
And I see him every now and then.
Yeah.
He will stop here, and we'll chit-chat a little bit.
Super.
And, so we're still on a friendly basis.
Well, that's good. Wow.
Well, yeah.
I'm a little surprised at that. Good for you.
Well,
That
was a long time ago.
No kidding. I hope he changes his mind. I did talk to him last year on the phone, and I said, you were my guy growing up. I just want to talk to you and talk about your KMI days. And he said, let me think about it.
Yeah.
That was a year ago. So,
well, he did write. He did write a little book.
I read the book. Yep. So. It's a nice little.
Yeah.
Half of it is KMI or radio,
yeah,
and half of it is how he got into becoming
ministry.
A pastor.
Yeah.
So I definitely wanted to read that.
And I admire him for his
sure,
for what he's done, not only in radio but for what he has done since then.
I also I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to talk with him. I just wanted to thank him in person and kind of get his story a little bit. But I don't know if as some of the guys get older, and maybe you can attest to this, you realize how many people remember that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It seems like Yeah.
The Vanished Kalamazoo site has been a real eye-opener for me about how many things people remember about KMI in those days.
It's crazy what people remember.
They remember things I don't remember.
See? And that's where it gets good. I have had people quote me things I said 20 years ago to my face. Now that freaks you out a little bit. Yeah. So the Vanished Kalamazoo thing that's
a great site.
Is definitely. I mean, it's for all the flack that social media gets, it's good when something nice can come out of it.
Absolutely.
That's one of those things.
And we have something similar for Plainwell.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen that.
Sure. I forget. It's a long name. It should be much shorter, but I'm one of the administrators of that site.
Yeah.
And but it's good to be able to remember lots of these things
and chronicle the history.
Oh yeah,
and that's important. I know you're into that. I see you Big show time. A lot of your family things. You're into your family history and all that, and you've got some amazing photos from your family back to the early 1900s, even before that. I think.
Yes.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's important stuff.
Yeah, I kind of hope that there's somebody in my lower generations that will be as enthused about that as I am, but it will be there for them if they want it.
Sure. All right, let's talk about one of the other big things that WKMI was known for back in the day. You already know. And everyone wants to know a couple of extra things about this because this was a big deal back then. You could not do it today, I don't think. I brought it up, though. A few years ago.
You did.
I brought it up and it got shot down at a meeting.
I couldn't do it with my audience.
Okay, yes. Okay,
You know, because
gotcha.
my audience is basically 60 and over,
It'd be interesting. That's for sure.
which is probably what the original contestants are now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Maybe we can find them. I don't know. In case you don't know what we're talking about, it's something that KMI did in the 70s called the Miss Skimpy contest.
Yes.
Who could wear the skimpiest bikini? And there were winners, and there were, I guess, winners. They were all winners.
They were.
And at the time, as were the crowd, or as was the crowd, at the time at WKMI Studios on Jennings Drive off Gull Road, out there near Gull and Sprinkle, there was a swimming pool.
Yes.
And that's where the thing was hosted for a while. You did it a couple times there. You had to move it to wings because it got so big, if I remember correctly.
Right.
Talk about that. I've seen the pictures. I've heard a couple of stories. How did that thing come to be? Was that your great idea?
No.
Really?
Well, it was my idea to promote it and continue it and make it bigger and bigger.
Okay. Well, yeah.
It was a Dave Thompson originated contest.
Sure. Okay.
You know, you probably know that in radio we frequently get things to give away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the sales department will come in and say, I've got, 50 Burger King Whoppers, get rid of them.
There you go.
With the coupons.
Yep.
Or a show's coming to town and we have 50 tickets to give away.
Mm-hmm.
Or record promoters will show up with, in those days, a box of 24 albums.
Yep.
Here, give these away. And all of it, of course, is to promote the product or the concert or whatever it is. Well, we had received some tickets for something. I don't remember what it was.
It must have been pretty good.
Well, I don't know.
Had to be.
They were tickets for something.
All right. Well, I'm going to find out what it was.
And I called Thompson in as soon as he came in for work that day, and I said, we've got 4 tickets for this, that, or the other thing.
Right.
Find a way to give them away. And I promptly went, I went downstairs to have lunch in the lunchroom, and Thompson he's just coming on the air. 3 o'clock or whatever it was. I don't know why I was still in the lunchroom at 3 o'clock. Let's not even go into that.
Yeah, right.
But I'm sitting there. The only reason I remember that I was in the lunchroom is because that's where I heard him say, I've got 4 tickets for this, and the girl here in the skimpiest bikini at 4 o'clock will get the tickets.
Oh, my God. He had it on the air, ready to go in less than an hour.
Yeah.
Love it. Wow.
So that's how it began. And we had 4 girls show up in bikinis.
Sweet.
And the girl in the skimpiest bikini won the tickets.
Right.
And we had them in the studio opposite the KMI control room where the automation system was located. And they came in, and David came out during a record, and he judged them.
Of course.
And he ended up giving the 4 tickets to a girl in a very tiny bikini.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting was not so much the girls that showed up, but the number of cars that had parked along Jennings Drive waiting for the girls to show up.
Wow. Yeah.
When I saw the cars, I said to myself, I think he's on to something here. So the next year, we decided to do it a little bigger.
Right.
We arranged for prize packages that were in the area of $1,000 worth of prizes.
Sweet.
I mean, this is
That's
1976,
Yeah.
somewhere around there.
Yeah. That's good.
I mean, that's a pretty hefty prize package.
That'll
back in
make
those
somebody
days.
find a skimpy bikini for
and
sure.
we ended up putting risers
Yeah.
out in front of the studio,
Okay.
in front of the station,
Yeah.
so that all of those cars parked on Jennings Drive and wherever else they came from could actually see the competition.
Gotcha.
And it just got bigger and bigger every year. It got so big, and we had so many complaints from neighbors on Jennings Drive
Oh, yeah.
that we decided, we should move this to Wing Stadium. Yeah. And somebody at the station said to me, well, when do you want to do that? And he said, I want to do that on a Saturday afternoon, a half hour after the GM plant shift gets out.
Oh, yes. Perfect. Wow.
So-
That's perfect.
So that's what we did.
Instead of Nob Hill, they went there.
You betcha. And I think we had probably 5,000 people.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I've seen the photos.
Yep. We had semis stopping on the highway.
Oh, really?
And guys sitting on the top of their cabs watching.
That is the best. Yeah, there's plenty of pictures. Run around.
Yeah.
If you want to get on the Vanished Kalamazoo site, I think there may be a couple there.
Yeah, I think there are. I've got a couple on my Facebook page.
Yeah.
But what you see, recognizing what a large deal that was, after I got fired at KMI in 1980, I ended up going to WNWN, the Stereo Country 98.
That's right.
And I told Gary Maloney, I said, you know what we should do? We should figure out a way to steal that audience, that crowd. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, how do you want to do that? I said, let's hold a country cutie contest. And we didn't think we could do bikinis right off the bat, so we did tight-fitting jeans, which was a big hit by Conway Twitty at the time.
Yeah.
And we held it at West Main Mall.
Oh, yeah. Okay, inside.
Inside, yeah.
Wow.
So we then I further carried it out to QXC in Otsego, and we did the Southwest Michigan Dream Girl competition.
Wow. I don't remember that one. I may have been gone during that time.
I've got pictures for that.
I'm
too.
sure you do. Boy, there are. I want to tell you a quick story. When I was in that building, and I was in that building from 93 to 2005, I knew that KMI had some anniversary coming up or something. Well, in the basement at one time, we were going through something, looking for something, and there was this big back corner where everything kind of went to die. Back, down, right, left. It's a bit. I found the box of stuff of those photos.
Oh my gosh.
And so what I did was I made a special website. I was in charge of the websites of the radio stations there at the time. I made a little website, put some of those things up there, kind of to celebrate. I think some of them are still there from this was 11 years ago or 12 years ago.
Yeah, I've seen the website.
Yeah. And so I thought, these are too good to be in this box.
Yes.
In this dank basement. So I put some of them up on the website. And if I may tell the truth, I stole a few that I still have at the house. I did the work. I want to,
You bet.
take a little payment.
Well, there was a room in the basement. I haven't been in the building at KMI probably since 1984.
Okay.
I might have been out there once to pick up a tape for something. But there used to be, when it was just KMI in that building, what we called the prize locker, which was at the bottom of the steps at the back on the parking lot entrance, and at the bottom of the steps to the right was a locked room. There was a padlock on the door, and that was the prize locker.
Okay.
And there was all kinds of stuff in there. There were music boxes that played "Smoke Get in Your Eyes." There were boxes of pink air valves for your tires.
Oh, wow.
There was just every leftover from every promotion that station had ever done. And there was a shelf full of 78 RPM records.
Oh, sure. Wow, from way back.
Oh, yeah.
Because that station has been there since
1947.
47, so just after the war.
So 70 years this year. They should be celebrating this year.
Oh, sure. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long, long time. Holy cow.
There were some good times.
Oh, yeah.
Those were the best years of my radio career.
Sure. And that's one of the reasons I want to talk about it, because so many people, including myself, just loved it. You knew the fun you were having on the radio at that radio station was really that fun. You could tell.
That's exactly what it was. Now, we talked earlier about David going to WYYY.
Right.
He did not have the same success at YYY as he had at KMI. Mm-hmm. You know why? Because he didn't have KMI behind him.
Yeah, yeah.
if you had now see. When I started, Howard Steer was still the owner and general manager. Mm-hmm. He died a year or so later, and his son David took over.
Right.
Dave Steer was a jock.
Mm.
He graduated Kalamazoo Central High School. He worked at his dad's radio station, but he went on to be a major market jock.
I did not know that.
In St. Louis, Cincinnati.
I'll be darned.
He was called the Wild Child on the radio. So when he took over, he had a jock's sensibilities about how the radio station should be run. And he was so promotion-minded that if you came up with a good idea and you took it to him, he'd say, let's do it.
Yeah, that's the key.
And you know, we could offer $1,000 or $5,000 prizes in the 70s.
Yeah. Wow. We don't do that now.
No, exactly.
You know? Wow.
And so, you know, that was the key. Between him and Bob Salmon, who was one of the, if not the most creative mind I ever knew in the radio business, between the two of them, who were best friends, and operating the station as general manager and sales manager and later station manager, boy, you just couldn't beat it.
Wow. Yeah, those were fun times, I'm quite sure.
I learned so much from them.
You're there, and then you're not. How did that come about?
Well, you know, I was there. I was fired in February of 1980.
Okay.
But allowed to stay for a couple of months until I found something. Wow. I stayed until April.
Okay.
I hadn't found anything, but Dave called me in, and he said, you know, I've given you 3 months to find something.
Right. That's rare.
He says that. Well, he gave me a choice in February. He said, you can leave now, and I'll make you a very handsome settlement, or you can take as long as you want to find something new. And thinking that, you know, somebody employed is more easily hired somewhere else, you know, than somebody unemployed.
Why was it that they were making you leave in the first place, though?
Well, if you recall the late 70s, the AM radio audience was constantly being eroded by FM.
Right, we're getting there, yeah.
In 1977, I think, we had the best ratings book we ever had. I'm falling into some radio jargon.
That's all right. People get ratings, I think.
But we had the best ratings we'd ever had. We beat WKZO finally for the first time in total audience.
Oh, 77. Okay.
76 or 70. I don't remember whether it was 76 or 77.
Was KZO news at that time, or were they?
No, they were still full service.
Okay, gotcha.
But we, I think, if I remember correctly, and 40 years on, I might be a little mistaken here, but I think we had a 21.6 share in total audience,
and that's huge.
That is absolutely huge.
Not too many places get to do that.
Nobody gets to do it now.
Right now.
These days, nobody does.
For sure.
But our 25 to 54 numbers were, way up there. And but by 1980, the book came out in February of 1980, and I took a week's vacation to review the book. And I made copious notes about what we should do, recognizing that our audience was being stolen by, among others, WGRD in Grand Rapids, which at the time was the hot FM station.
Yep.
And I made all these notes, and I got a call from the station from Bob that said, Dave's here and he wants to talk with you. I thought, well, great. I've got all of these plans on what we can do to stem this flow. Mm-hmm. And I showed up in the meeting was held in Bob's office, and Dave Steer was there, and he had not been there for the previous 6 months. He came back.
Oh.
And before I could say anything, he said, we think we need to make some serious changes here. Wow. And we believe that you're too deeply rooted in top 40 radio to make the changes we need to make. Well, the changes I was about to recommend was that we go more adult contemporary and abandon top 40. He didn't even want to see those.
Wow.
He said, so we're going to let you go.
That's a bummer.
That's how I left.
That's a bummer. So that's 80.
Yep.
And so that and you were doing mornings.
I was doing mornings.
And so then after that, the morning show that people remember still, I would imagine, is Holiday and King.
Before that was Don Riley.
Was it? Did not
Don
know that.
Riley was appointed to succeed me as program director.
There you go.
And after Don left...
What had he been doing?
He was doing afternoons.
Oh.
I hired him from WDRQ in Detroit to come to Kalamazoo.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
You don't usually come from Detroit to Kalamazoo. It's usually the opposite.
Exactly. But we made a really serious offer to him.
Oh, yeah.
At the time I left, Scott, I was making $24,000, which in 1980 was a bunch for Kalamazoo.
Sure.
That was huge.
I mean, at this point, well, today it's like market 190 maybe. Something like that, give or take. I don't know what it was back then.
Yeah, somewhere around that.
But yeah, if you could make more than the national average,
and I hired Don Riley in as a jock at $18,000.
Okay. Well, yeah. Jeez. So he must not have lasted long in the morning.
I don't think he did.
Yeah.
I was the first of about 10 people who got canned.
Oh, so it went. Dominoes started to fall.
Yes.
Wow. And so you never were around Holiday and King. They decided that we're just going to do our own show.
No, I competed against Holiday and King.
Yeah, that's the time frame where I'm a little fuzzy, so I didn't know the
they started
time frame of that.
As I am told by Tom Summers, he was invited to do that morning show, so it would have been Summers and King. And he turned it down. He did a couple of shows with them, and then he turned it down, and Dave Steer, Doc Holliday,
right,
went on with Bob Salmon, Bob King.
I'll be darned. All right, so
That's an awful lot of, as they say, inside baseball.
That is. So you are, it was the one nice thing they did for you was let you hang around for a little while anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't happen hardly at all.
No, and I maintained a pretty good relationship with Bob Salmon,
right,
even after I left,
yeah,
and with a number of the other people who worked there.
Sure.
David, I was so PO'd at that I could hardly even think of his name.
Oh, boy.
But his mom died a few years later, and I sent him a sympathy card because his mother had always been very good to me.
Yeah.
That was Howard Steer's widow.
Right.
And every time she came to the radio station, she would stop in my office and ask how I was doing, ask about my family, and she would, before she left, she would always say to me, you know, you were one of Howard's favorites.
Oh, well, that's good to hear.
And when she passed away, I thought I really should send David a card. And I did, and I sent a little note in it. And then I didn't hear anything, but when my mother died a few years later, I got a card from him.
There you go.
And so the relationship was repaired before he died.
Sure.
And
well,
I'm so glad that happened.
That is nice to hear. All right, so you go from there to WNWN. You're now on
not
the FM.
immediately.
No? What'd you do before that?
Before I did that, I built a recording studio in my basement, which now serves as the main studio for WAKV. My plan then was I had given 13 years to this radio station, and I thought to myself, I just can't possibly go work for somebody else again.
Wow.
I can't, because I gave everything.
Sure.
And I thought, I'm going to go into business for myself. I'm going to record commercials and, you know, the voiceover thing. So my father-in-law at the time showed up here. I left in I think, April 4th, which was on the anniversary of my hiring 13 years earlier.
Wow.
And my father-in-law at the time showed up 2 days later, and he said, "You're going to build a studio or not?" And I said, "Well, I really should." And he said, "Well, let's get going."
I'll be done.
And he and I built a studio in the basement.
Wow.
And before I could really get it going, a friend of mine stopped in and said, WNWN is advertising for an on-air person.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, well, I don't know. Country radio, I've never done country.
Yeah.
But I had met Gary Maloney before at some record promoters' lunches. And I thought, well, I'll give him a call. What the heck? And I called, and he said, we're looking for somebody to do the window on Westnedge.
Oh, yeah.
I said, well, what the dickens is the window on Westnedge? And he said, we have a studio on South Westnedge Avenue, and we want to do our midday show from there. Would you consider it? And I said, Gary, I will not be an employee. If you will take me as a independent contractor, that I can set my own rules and all that kind of thing, I said I would do it. And that was our arrangement. And he ended up naming me as the program director as an independent contractor.
Interesting.
But that was a good time. I did the show from South Westnedge with a guy back in Coldwater running all the records and all the spots and everything else. Wow. And it was fun.
And how long was that? Did that last?
That was from the summer of 1980 until New Year's Eve 1982.
Okay.
When he fired me because he learned that Bob Brink, Mark McGuire, Bert Elzinga, and I had formed a corporation to buy the station in Otsego.
And that is the...
And then 3 weeks after I was fired, Bob and I drove our application to buy it to Washington, D.C., and filed it in person and drove back in 24 hours.
And that was, wow, really? What a trip.
Yeah.
And that was WQXC, correct? Or was it different call letters?
At the time, it was WAOP.
That's it.
That's right. WOAMAM.
That's not easy to say.
No. And the funny thing is that Mark McGuire and I, who was he was originally news director at KMI, and later a salesman at KMI, sales manager at KMI, I think, and Bob Brink, who was sales manager at KMI. But McGuire and I had earlier gotten an option on the Otsego properties from the owner, Bob Dahl, but we could not. We tried like the devil, but we could not get the backers for it. And Brink and Elzinga were able to put that financial package together, and they took us on as members of the corporation.
So 4 of you owned
4
that?
of us.
And it's the building.
Forum Communications has 2 meanings.
2 meanings?
FOURUM.
Got it.
4 of us.
I gotcha. I did not know that. Yeah. And that is where I work today.
Exactly.
So, whew. There's a lot going on there.
All of these,
I'm telling you.
All of these intermingling connections.
So, how much? So, while you were there, you're on the air? At where the building?
WNWN or
No,
Quixie?
Like past WNWN, Quixie now. Which was AOP, then changed to Quixie.
We almost immediately changed the call letters
Right.
to WQXC,
right.
Because I had been so impressed by WQXI in Atlanta, which was a terrific radio station, and I thought there's a lot we can do with those call letters if we call ourselves Quixie.
Yep, and people still do.
Yeah, in spite of Cool 101.
Yeah, I mean, they
They
literally.
still call it Quixie.
I will be in the building, and someone will walk in and do something, and they will say those words.
Yeah.
And I will say,
That probably
"What?"
just drives Bob to distraction.
Oh my goodness! So wow. Okay. So you're in the
I would-
building.
yeah. We bought the station.
you're
We
part
moved
owner.
in February of 2003. No, not 1993. I
Yes.
was only 20 years
Right.
old.
Yeah.
1983. 1983.
So
February.
you're done with WNWN.
Yep.
You're now 1/4 owner.
Well, yeah, we weren't equal shareholders.
Okay, but you were
McGuire and I had lesser shares
smaller
than Bob
because they had
and
put
Bert.
together most of the.
Yeah.
All right. So
So
you're
we were all part of the corporation.
and you're on the air as well.
I was doing mornings.
Yep.
McGuire was doing sales. We brought Bill Anthony back from
New York.
Rochester
Yep.
to come do afternoons.
Yep.
We kept Denny Cooley, who
Right.
had been there with the previous ownership.
Yep.
We kept him there doing mornings or doing middays.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember who was doing nights at the time. I don't recall.
And it was just one radio station in the building at the time.
Well, there were both. There was the AM and the FM. The AM was automated music of your life.
Oh, okay. I didn't. And what
Music of your life.
What was the numbers on that?
980.
Oh, that's
mine. 980.
I'm sorry. See, this is where I have the disconnect,
Yeah.
and I don't know
Yeah.
all the. Okay, so that was in that, and that was
Yes.
the transmitter on the. Okay.
Yep.
I should have known that, and for some reason I didn't put that together.
Yep. That's what it was.
So this is 83.
Mm-hmm.
How long did that last then?
That lasted till 1993.
So we got a decade
Yeah.
ish.
This gets a little.
Well, tell how much you want to talk about.
Complicated.
However much you want to give me.
Yeah, I don't really want to get into the details
That's
of
fine.
all of this.
That's fine.
But
At some point, you leave.
There was, as you might say, a falling out among shareholders.
Gotcha.
And McGuire had already left. We had bought a station in Benzie County in Frankfurt.
Oh, okay.
And McGuire had traded his shares for that station up there. So we were left with Bob Brink, Bert Elzinga, and me.
Right.
Bob and Bert had equal amounts. I had like 20%.
Yeah.
And we had a bit of a falling out among the remaining shareholders. And I ended up leaving and negotiating a deal to take the AM station, which we began as Vintage Radio
Right.
in November 1st, 1993. And then we secured a full-time lease of the property a couple of years later, and then we bought it from Forum.
Gotcha. Whew.
Yeah, it gets complicated.
And so 980, yeah, a little. I mean, I knew like 75% of it. Some of the things I didn't put together. So currently, you are the owner of that radio station.
980.
980.
Yes.
It's the studio is in your basement.
Mm-hmm.
You and so how many years has that been? 93, 2000,
24 years.
24. So next year will be 25
Yep.
years. Holy cow!
It actually coincides with Suzanne's and my marriage.
Oh, really? Oh, well, that's nice.
Because we got married on the 3rd of July in 1991. In 1993.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
93. And promised, for better or for worse and all that. And Suzanne was working as a nurse at the time at an area nursing home. And I went into work on the 5th of July after we got married on the 3rd,
Right.
Monday morning, and was told that I was fired from my own station.
All right.
So I came home and I called Suzanne at the nursing home and I said, "Do you remember that part about for better or for worse?"
Yeah.
I said, "The worst just happened."
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
So, yeah, it took me 3 months to negotiate with Bob Brink to be able to lease the AM station for 6 hours a day,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
6 days a week, and we began Vintage Radio.
Yeah.
And then we eventually negotiated a a full-time lease, and then a purchase.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, so is there, how do I say this nicely? Is there any end in sight to the radio station?
To AM 980?
Do you see retirement in your future?
Well, here's a scoop. Here's a scoop.
Okay.
The station's for sale.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Officially for sale.
Yeah. After 55 years on the air, and at the age of 73, I've decided that I can no longer just keep getting up at 4 o'clock every morning.
I do not blame you at all.
And I'd like to spend a few years with my wife enjoying ourselves.
Wow.
And
good for you.
so we, if anybody out there wants to buy an AM radio station, which is soon to have an FM translator, by the way.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And that'll go with it, eh?
Yeah.
All right. You're going to do all the work on that, huh?
Well,
So
we've
the next person-
already been approved preliminarily. We have to file the long form application.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Super.
yeah.
Wow.
So
And the wattage is going to be...
I think 25 watts.
Okay.
Which is enough to cover Otsego and Plainwell.
Right.
And,
All right. Wow. Well, my first inclination was to go get my checkbook. My second inclination is, wait, I don't have that much in the checkbook. Is there a price associated with it yet?
We have not established
Okay.
a price. We are entertaining offers.
You're going to see who's interested. And,
I actually have 2 people currently interested.
Oh.
One of whom does not have the financial capability, and the other is waiting to hear
Sure.
what I might accept.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. All right. So, yes, retirement is within sight.
I hope so.
Good for you.
I'm tired.
Hey, I hope to get out sooner than you do. The 4
know,
in the morning is.
I'll tell you what, Scott. I enjoyed this business immensely.
Oh, yeah.
I have from the day I got into it until today. I have enjoyed the business. But you reach a point where you just say to yourself, "There's got to be more than this."
Mm.
I have given up an awful lot to stay in the radio business.
Wow.
For a while, the only days off I had, other than scheduled days off, were the 2 days my kids were born,
Oh, boy.
both on Memorial Day,
Nice.
which I should have had off anyway,
Right.
but didn't.
Yeah, no kidding.
And
Wow.
but since we've started this, I haven't had a day off probably in 15 years, aside from for medical reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets old after a while.
Sure.
My wife was raised on a farm,
Well,
and she said, "You got to think of this as having to milk the cows every day."
yeah, I can see that. Well, she's used to hard work, so,
Yeah. So every day I get up at 4:15 and go milk the cow.
Yep. Wow. That's a lot of milk.
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is.
I only did it 15 years, the getting up at the 4, and it was like, whew, that's a tough gig. People don't realize it until they have to do it.
Exactly.
And to go along with that, if I may, being on all the time is also part of the drag of sometimes, always having to be on at 6 a.m. is not something you want to do every day of your life.
No, you don't. But like I say, it has had its moments. It's had some great moments.
Oh, for sure. Oh, before we wrap up, that reminds me. I know you've talked about this a lot, but I want to kind of get it on the record and get some of your feelings. You were able to hook up with the Eagles at their Grand Rapids concert.
I was
a little while ago. And one of the cool things about your career was you got to help them get their first hit.
Their first number one.
Number one,
hit.
sorry. Yes.
They had several hits before that, but
This
had
was
never
number
hit
one.
number one.
Yeah, tell that story because it's so awesome.
It was The Best of My Love was the song. And we added it at KMI as an album cut. We did feature albums.
Right.
And I would select a couple of different cuts that we would use as feature album cuts.
Now, at this time, just so everyone knows, record companies would steer you to the song they wanted you to play. Here's the record, here's the 45, whatever. Yep. This is the song you are to play.
Yeah. And at the time, the On the Border album by the Eagles the company, Elektra Records, had released, I believe, James Dean as the single.
Yep.
Well, I didn't think James Dean was all that great of a single. You know, that I am reputed to have a pretty damn good ear.
Sure.
You know, record companies used to come to me and say, "What do you think?"
Oh, wow.
And then they would recommend what I said to other radio stations.
Oh, that's cool.
One of the people that regularly watched our playlists was Rosalie Trombley of CKLW, about whom Bob Seger wrote the song Rosalie.
Got it. Legendary station.
Exactly, and legendary music director. But they released James Dean, and I thought, this really isn't that great a tune.
It was almost a novelty song.
Pretty close, but it wasn't. After Take It Easy and Peaceful Easy Feeling, it wasn't what the Eagles needed to release.
Okay, yeah.
And I listened to Best of My Love, and I thought, my God, that's a great song.
Yeah.
And so we added that as a feature album cut, and we started playing it, and it started getting requests. It started getting a lot of requests.
Yeah. Did you guys take notes on requests at the time?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you wrote them down. And okay.
And so the electric guy would call me, a guy named Rip Pelly, and he would call and say, "What do you think about James Dean?" I said, "It's on the list, but we're not getting any calls for it or anything. I don't know what it's doing sales-wise. It's not showing up in our sales reports." I said, "But we are getting a lot of calls for Best of My Love." "Well, why are you playing that?" I said, "Because I think it's a good record.
Yeah.
I think you guys should release it." And he said, "Well, we'll keep an eye on that." And we did our checks on sales, and the record stores in Kalamazoo were selling out of the On the Border album, but we weren't getting any calls for James Dean.
Mm-hmm.
We were getting calls for Best of My Love. So I passed that information along to Rip Pelly. And after a couple of weeks of that, and I think this was in the summer of 74 or early fall of 74, and I told Rip, I said, "We're dropping James Dean. We're going to add Best of My Love as a single." He says, "You can't do that. It's not a single." I said, "I can do anything I want." And so I added the song as a single, and it had, by the time it reached the top 10, Rip called me and he said, "We're thinking about pressing 1,000 copies of Best of My Love and putting them in Kalamazoo." I said, "That'd be great. Yeah. We'll be anxious to see how that does."
Sure.
And he called me back the next week and he said, "Forget that. We're pulling James Dean. We're rush releasing Best of My Love." Well, Best of My Love ended up going to number 1.
Yeah.
It was their first number 1 song. Unfortunately, it peaked at 900,000 copies.
Ooh.
Did not sell 1 million. But by the time Rosalie Trombley added it at CKLW in January, it had already dropped off our chart.
Wow. How about that?
So that was the reason that they thought that we should have some tickets to see their concert.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks to my daughter, Diana, who pursued this to the nth degree. She talked to Rip Pelly. She talked to his boss, Bert Stein, who was the head of all of this back in the day at Elektra. And Bert apparently put in a call to the band.
Cool.
And said, "This guy is the guy that started it all for you." And so we got 8 tickets.
Oh, wow.
to the concert. We got to meet the band backstage.
And they all knew the story?
And they knew the story,
sure.
And they gave us a shout-out from the stage.
Yeah.
And we got humongous applause.
That's great.
It was It was one of the best nights I ever had on the radio.
And then people in the crowd said, "Wait a second, you mean a guy at the radio station made a song famous? And what happened there?"
It happened back then. I don't know how much it happened. You know, I'm not involved in contemporary radio at all, so I don't know what happens these days.
I don't either.
and you're doing it.
Yeah. I don't pay attention.
But back then, I mean, we had a couple of gold records. I had a gold record for Nazareth's Love Hurts.
Oh, yeah.
And Alan O'Day, Undercover Angel.
Oh, my God.
A gold record for.
You guys played the hell out of that. I remember.
Oh, yeah.
I remember.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So there were some good times back then.
Oh,
And you know, the payola thing, I never got involved in that. I can tell you this, all of the major label people that I ever dealt with would never get involved in that kind of thing. I had a minor label guy offer me $100 to play a record once, and I threw him out of my office. But
yeah, well, it did happen. I had seen a couple things here and there.
Yeah.
Over the years.
But the 70s were good times for radio.
Oh, for sure.
They really were. We had some just spectacular
And God
times.
bless you for having that much fun and making it sound like you were having fun, and the people of Kalamazoo just glommed onto it and dug it. And I'm glad I was there for that.
My part was very small in it, actually. It was the guys on the air that did so well. It was my job to keep them in line, if you will, which is kind of like herding cats.
Yeah, right.
But those were good days for WKMI, and I think the Kalamazoo audience really appreciated what we did.
For sure. And I sometimes tell some of the younger people I meet now in the media business, TV, radio, even some of the digital people, newspapers, quote unquote, I wish some of you had been able to be in the business before the internet. Those were the best,
before
most
the
fun
internet
times.
and before the FCC rule changes, which allow one company to own 8 radio stations in one market. It's so bad.
Yeah, that was a bummer for sure.
Yep.
But I'm glad I got to spin some records before the CDs came out. I did get to do that, so I'm glad. And WKMI was definitely the driving force in me getting to the radio business, and I'm glad to say you were a part of that, so I thank you.
And I thank you for allowing me to tell the story.
You bet.
Because it's nice to have it on the record.
You bet. It certainly was. So thank you for the time. I know we went a little longer than I wanted to, but I appreciate your patience. And
you can edit.
Yeah, I'm going to edit out half of it. No. Jim Higgs, radio legend. He is still the owner of WAKV Radio, although it's up for sale. Stay tuned. Jim Higgs, thank you.
You bet, Scott. Thank you.